And I said to Cam, wow, look at this, let's go. And we ran for the house.
Immediately above me in the main street, Murchison Street, was the front of a huge, massive volume of smoke, which alarmed me immediately.
The noise from the wind and the noise from the actual fire coming was just a big roar, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And then I actually realised that this is going to be really bad. That's the moment that I realised that, hey, this is going to be a lot worse than I ever thought it was going to be.
We kind of just dropped everything we had in our hands and looked up because the fire was right there looking at us, about to burn the house down.
Internationally, we talk about fires in terms of the fire line intensity, so how many kilowatts per metre. So the fire that we saw on Black Saturday here were in the vicinity of 100,000 kilowatts per metre. Now, a metre is not a very big area. 100,000 kilowatts, that's like having 100,000 fan heaters stacked up on top of each other, blowing heat out on top of you for every metre of fire line. So on the wind change, when we've got 30 kilometres of fire front and you've got 1,000 kilowatts, 100,000 kilowatts being produced for every metre of that fire edge, that's an enormous amount of energy being produced.
The community faces a life or death decision. Stay and defend their properties or run for their lives.
I've always known for a long time that this is a place that if there's a fire coming, you must stay. You must stay and have somewhere you can shelter. You cannot get in a car and drive. The first thing that will happen is the trees will be down across the road and you'll be stuck. You cannot do that, you know. And they always say, leave early or make a decision to stay. But I've always known that, and I've always known that I would never attempt to drive out on those roads.
It was just instinct. We all just grabbed what we could and jumped in the cars as quick as possible.
Get in here!
Let's down here.
In here!
Just come in, mate.
For one reason or another, I opted to stay in town rather than get in a car. Get into a car and drive towards a fire with a fire coming after you and the potential of trees coming down in the road, or perhaps with so many cars, even accidents. So I just thought, no burning cars for me.
So it's an Australian policy in a bushfire sense, and we call it stay or go. You either make a decision to leave your property early in the day, or you make your decision to stay and defend your own home, actively defend it. And if you do make that decision, your home has to be defendable. And if yours is not, then go to your neighbours or go to somewhere else that is defendable. Plan as if we, the fire service in our truck, is not going to turn up, and if we turn up, treat it as a bonus, which is a whole different culture that we have here in this country about you accepting your own responsibility for your own well-being.
It was soon apparent that there was no escaping this fire.
When I saw the fire coming down over the hill and coming towards me, I knew there's no way you could outrun something like this. It was too big, it was too powerful. Even if you were driving a car directly away from it, you couldn't outrun it. It would just overtake you, and it just ate everything as it came. It just took everything with it.
This fire was massive. From what I've ever been involved in, it was like 100 times bigger. It was totally unstoppable. There was nothing could have stopped this fire.
As the firestorm approached, it created its own extreme microclimate.
At ground level, with all that hot air rising, it actually needs to draw air in to replace the air that's rising. For example, the trees that were broken off 3 or 4 metres above the ground snapped off, just like matchsticks, from this incredible inrush of air into this convection column. Locally, the power of the wind is as much as a tornado or a cyclone, basically. It would have had to have been, locally, at least 140 kilometre-an-hour winds to have done that amount of damage.
The noise from the wind and the noise from the actual fire coming was just a big roar, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger. Trees were falling all over the place because it was just so strong, and I was just getting ripped out of the ground.
sound of the fire was just there. It was just so loud. You couldn't hear anything. The wind was unimaginable. It was blowing everything everywhere, chairs. The trees were falling down. Feeling the wind push the car from side to side on the road and watching the fire come closer and closer. We didn't at one point think we were going to even make it out of the house, let alone up the road.
The firestorm approaches, unleashing a lethal wave of burning embers.
I came up and I told them that they were going to come under severe ember attack at any moment, given what I'd seen.
It looks like 100 shooting stars coming out of the sky, except they're big branches and God knows what falling out of the sky that are just in flames, big fireballs just coming at you.
The enormous wind that was accompanying the fire was blasting embers at the house, and it sounded like machine gun fire.
It was like a furnace, like standing in front of a blast furnace where everything's just been thrown straight at you. I had my back to it. I was all covered. I had a hat on, glasses. I had sunglasses on. They were melting on my face.
With huge flames being generated by the firestorm, the intense heat radiates, crippling everything in its path.
The biggest killer in fires is radiant heat. And so for people to evacuate at the last minute means they're exposing themselves to radiant heat.
If you've got flames that might be 60 or 80 metres tall, basically the safe distance you can be from the radiant heat is about 4 times the flame height. So that might be 200 or 300 metres in the case of some of these flames. So the survivable distance from a flame is usually about 4 times its height.
The heat was just unbearable. I had to be totally covered up. If you had any exposed skin, you would have been burnt.
So I knew if the fire was around me, it was taking the entire town. With that thought in my mind, it just seemed too monumental, almost to grasp that everything could be burning at one moment.
Flames were as big as you can ever imagine. They weren't little, they weren't just trees, it wasn't just the grass on fire, it was the whole sky that was on fire.
This fire moved so quickly, the warnings just couldn't keep up. Many residents tried to flee from their homes, taking refuge in town centres where they felt they would be safe. But this would not be the case. What happened next was chaos and panic on a scale Australia had never seen before.
There was cars and trucks and utes and vans and buses going every direction. No one really knew which direction to go in, which was the safest. We all huddled up together, hugged each other, poured water all over us and sat behind the counter in the Wombat Cafe just waiting for it. There was one bus that we actually did see, a little red minibus that we saw. We actually watched them drive out. And after they drove out, we actually said to ourselves, I hope they make it, because there was elderly people in that bus and children in that bus. A few days after the fire, we actually found out the people in that bus never made it.
At the height of the confusion, people tried to escape any way they could. But in many cases, it was just too late. 4 cars, disorientated by the blinding smoke and intense heat, collided with tragic results.
Fires were everywhere. My dad was involved in a 4-car collision there, and I couldn't get him out. He was still dead in the car there.
We just saw a number of bodies which quite simply had not been able to get away. The people had not been able to get away from the fire, and they were unfortunately deceased. And it was pretty heartbreaking because you could see what they were trying to do, and unfortunately couldn't do anything with it.
With no hope of getting out of the fire's destructive path and no chance of rescue, the people of Victoria brace for impact.
There was no firemen, no police, no nothing, no services along those lines whatsoever.
In many towns, the fires cut off power and phone lines, meaning the residents had no communication with the outside world. With no warning, many people had no idea just how bad things had become and were oblivious to the mounting danger. It was now a case of everyone for himself.
I assumed I was alone. There was one point at which a car drove up beside the lake and another one behind it. It quickly caught fire and I heard some voices at that point yelling at one another. I never heard their voices again. I don't know what happened to them, whether they perished there, but they didn't get into the lake. I assumed I was alone from that point of time.
No one was going to come and help you. You were too far in the bush, so there was no access in a situation when you have a fire coming like that.
We were all there crying and holding each other and saying our last goodbyes to each other and telling each other how much we loved each other and saying sorry for all the things we did, and they were our last words. They were what we believed were our last words.
I thought, no, I'm not breathing properly. My breathing's very heavy.
Per metre. Now, a metre is not a very big area. 100,000 kilowatts, that's like having 100,000 fan heaters stacked up on top of each other, blowing heat out on top of you for every metre of fire.
It was the front of a huge, massive volume of smoke, which alarmed me immediately.
The noise from the wind and the noise from the actual fire coming was just a big roar, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And then
And I said to Cam, wow, look at this, let's go. And we ran for the house.
Immediately above me in the main street, Murchison Street,
Internationally, we talk about fires in terms of the fire line intensity, so how many kilowatts per metre. So the fire that we saw on Black Saturday here were in the vicinity of 100,000 kilowatts.
We realised that this is going to be really bad. That's the moment that I realised that, hey, this is going to be a lot worse than I ever thought it was going to be.
We kind of just dropped everything we had in our hands and looked up because the fire was right there looking at us, about to burn the house down.